Battlefield 5 is naturally the 11th game in the Battlefield series, which of course continues the tone set in the previous game, Battlefield 1. Now, I'm sure we all remember that Battlefield 1 was a huge success. There was this fun space in time where the announcement video was the most liked trailer on YouTube, with the Call of Duty title for that year, Infinite Warfare, which is still one of the most disliked videos on the entirety of YouTube. It was this perfect explosion of positive press. People had been growing bored of the trend of setting first-person shooter games further and further into the future, and with Battlefield 1 being set in World War I, it came at the perfect time. It was also seen as a return to form, since previous games in the Battlefield series just didn't live up to expectations. It also made the deliberate decision to ease accurate historical elements in favour of fun gameplay. According to game designer Daniel Berlin, gameplay was the most important aspect when they were developing the game, assuring gamers that it would not be slowed down due to historical accuracy. So basically, DICE made the deliberate decision to prioritise fun over historical accuracy. Anyway, so Battlefield 1 releases, sells 15 million copies, and it's obviously a huge success. 2 years later, however, Battlefield 5, or V, is announced, and everybody hated it. Battlefield 5 moves on from the setting of World War I to World War II. World War II is obviously one of the most popular settings you can have of an FPS game, with the original Call of Duty and Medal of Honor games popularizing it. And at this time, there was a kind of renaissance for that time period, as Call of Duty World War II released a year earlier, so this seemed like a perfect fit. The game was announced with the release of a cinematic trailer, and that's where it took a turn for the worse. I will defend Battlefield 5, but this trailer is pretty terrible. It's all made to look like a single camera take, and it's so frantic and chaotic, which I understand that's a war thing, but I just feel like I'm getting my head rattled looking at it. But there's an elephant in the room. What DICE decided to do would be unforgivable. They decided to include a woman. Oh dear. Now, I want to say right here that I have basically no history of playing Battlefield games, so I didn't play one, and when this trailer was coming out, I was not paying attention, but nevertheless, I still heard so many complaints. They were so loud. At the time, the big argument was that the game wasn't being historically accurate, which is, obviously that's what the franchise had been doing the entire time. Except, wait a minute. So basically, DICE made the deliberate decision to prioritize fun over historical accuracy. Anyway, I'm sure their arguments totally hold up today.
When you put women at the forefront of your World War II video game, and on the freaking cover, and then you pioneer it as being on the right side of history, you come off as a pretentious cunt.
Obviously, we all know that video games must be historically accurate, no fantastical elements, and devoid of any politics. Personally, this is why I love BioShock so much. Now, to be fair, there is criticism with Battlefield 5, and I didn't hear about any of this when the game came out, mostly because the other complaint was just too loud. But Battlefield 5 was lacking in a lot of content. For the record, I'm not going into any detail about multiplayer whatsoever in this video, but obviously, you buy a Battlefield game for multiplayer. That's the reason you buy a big FPS game. And it's thanks to this video from Angry Joe that I was actually able to understand the genuine flaws of the game as it came out.
The new thing is you can airdrop, well, on that map, the Aerodrome map, where you get to it by the third map. But the first map is terrible because the planes spawn in immediate, they blow up, 10 of us fucking die
in the first few seconds. Bail out. Oh, we all died.
What the fuck?
I'm going to be talking exclusively about the story mode during this video, and it wasn't even available upon release.
There's 4 fucking stories, and one of them isn't even available.
But now it's 3 years later, and Battlefield 5 is free on PS Plus right now, at least if I can get this video out on time. And to my surprise, I was about to play one of the best FPS campaigns since Titanfall 2. And to be fair, Titanfall 2 wasn't even that long ago. And I think Battlefield 1 actually has a very similar campaign to this as well. and they both released in like the same month or something. So anyway, it's good. It's good. Go play Titanfall 2. When you first boot up Battlefield 5, it immediately puts you into the opening level of the story mode, or war stories as they're called here. It carries on the tone set up in Battlefield 1's war stories, where the initial level is a series of vignettes that last a few minutes each and aim to show World War II from the eyes of those who fought on the front lines. The war stories, for the most part, take themselves very seriously, and this opening level creates an effective mood piece that showcases both the global war as well as the small-scale, visceral conflict. It also ends with, with music that is seriously just the Shire theme from Lord of the Rings. The war stories are made up of 5 episodes, including this opening act. The rest of the 4 episodes all take place in different countries following a different character. Each episode is set a year apart, beginning in 1942 until the final days of World War II in 1945. I like to think of the episodes as being split into 2 categories: gameplay focused and story focused. Fortunately for me, and the structure of this video, the 2 initial episodes set in North Africa and Norway are gameplay focused, with the story being more supplemental and essentially gives context to the character you're playing as. It's in this first gameplay focused level that just blew me away. Part 1, the gameplay of war. That's right. The 6 minutes you just watched, that wasn't even part 1. That was, oh shit. The first major episode set in North Africa during 1942 blew my goddamn mind. When I played this, I abandoned the video I was making at the time and knew I had to talk about this game. The episode is split up into 3 acts, and at first I was expecting a generic shooter campaign, but when you reach the first enemy encounter, my expectations started changing. The first level teaches you the basics, of course. It encourages you to use binoculars to mark enemies, alarm systems, and weapon crates. They also encourage you to stay stealthy and avoid detection. Pretty rare for a big budget military shooter. Eventually you have to sneak into a hangar to destroy German planes. You can of course go off guns blazing, or you can learn how to get up to the tower, see where enemies are, where they go through the barracks to the left or through the tents to the right. There's a good variety of enemies to deal with here. Some are walking about solo for you to pick off, others are running about in a group, and at the end, there's a guy with a flamethrower who's basically a mini-boss. And at this point I started thinking, this is kinda like Hitman. What I mean by this is that it reminds me of Hitman in a way that you have a clear objective to complete. You know exactly where it is. Something that can be over in minutes if you rush in without thinking of the consequences. You'll get a lot of people shooting you on the way out, but if you're careful, you'll get out. Or you can slow it down and consider your moves, constantly thinking about if someone might be able to see you and alert more guards. Always finding new ways to get through the environment. It becomes less about completing the objective itself and more about how you get to it. And if you think I was stretching a bit here, well, after completing this act, you of course move on to the next. And it's here where DICE made one of the best levels in a first-person shooter game. Immediately, you realize how big this level is. You're given 3 areas that you have to get to as part of your objective: a village, a comms bunker, and an airbase. You can go to them in any order you want. I believe the airbase is the closest, so I went to that first. And it's there that it dawned on me just how many ways I could complete the objective. The objective here is to blow up 2 groups of supplies, in this airbase specifically. And before I go any further with Hitman parallels, it's not like you can pull off an elaborate scheme that involves a 10-step process and you can make it all look like an accident. It's more about the routes you can take to the objective. What weapons do you use? Do you want to sneak and not be seen? Do you want to snipe from the mountain, do a drive-by, just stampede through there? Or you could always just take a plane. Because it's Battlefield, you have such a variety of tools and arsenal to work with. So many guns, so many vehicles, all within a physics engine that makes it feel wonderful. Both supply groups are surrounded by an incredible amount of explosives, so make sure you don't do this. They're both pretty close to each other, but obviously, if you set off one, it's not exactly subtle. And in fact, writing this right now with knowledge I got from later levels, I realised I could put dynamite at both objectives and set them off together. Once you do set off the explosives though, you gotta get out of there because the enemies will be right on you and you need to get out as quickly as possible because the AI on these guys will flank you, get in your way. You need to be quick on your feet to get away from these guys. I constantly feel like I'm scrambling to keep on top of whatever situation I'm in. Not only that, but the only way to get ammo here is to loot it from dead bodies and ammo crates. Or just pick up a new gun. Having ammo only available from dead bodies, which is obviously not a new concept, but it forces you to keep moving, and if you stick behind cover, you'll run out of ammo pretty quickly. It's one of these levels that every time I died, and I died a lot, it made me excited because it meant that I could try a new route. Your other objectives at the village involved taking down satellites. While the airbase, the objectives were out in the open. Here though, you have to go in a little tiny room and arm the bomb directly. With the village being a smaller area, they instead play with elevation rather than the openness. Not only that, but if everyone's alerted, you'll have planes firing down at you as well. So you can be shot at from above and below. Not only that, but the streets are cramped, so if you get caught in a pinch, it's hard to get out. Lastly, the comms bunker involves you having to get into the bunker, preferably undetected, but I knew that was not in the cards for me, so I had to go all out before heading down. After getting there, you get a shortcut scene, and if this was your last objective, then it's all about fleeing the scene and getting to the end of the level. Every route you take feels like you're playing out a Mission Impossible or James Bond film. I've never played a game where I feel like I'm always on edge. Replayability is even encouraged with the optional challenges you're given. For instance, one of the challenges is to complete all the objectives while you're in the plane. The final act for the North African episode is basically a tower defense game. It's important to note that not all levels are Hitman inspired, in fact, most of them aren't. However, these are still really fun. You must fend off incoming waves of enemies that get more and more aggressive. You can be attacked by dudes on the ground, dudes in planes, dudes on tanks. It's also where the game fully commits to proving itself as war fantasy by having your character singing along while killing hordes of enemies. If you're going to play anything of these campaign episodes, make sure it's the North African episode, as it fully commits to being just a great gameplay experience while leaving story to the side. However, the next episode, set in Norway, does have some tricks up its sleeve. I'm only going to briefly mention the rest of the episodes, largely because none of them are as interesting as North Africa, but the Norway episode comes very close. Now, the way that I'm going to describe this level is going to make 5 people who understand it very happy. This level is basically the spiritual successor to the first major level of James Bond Nightfire. That level involved you infiltrating a castle covered in snow, sneaking your way past guards, disabling alarms, all the while progressing towards the center. As fun as that level was, Battlefield 5 takes it to the next step by having you infiltrate a snow-covered Nazi base on skis. This level does go in a different direction from the previous Hitman-inspired level. Being in the mountains, it's obviously not as open, and the initial section is practically a hallway. But getting to the base itself allows for a lot of creativity in how you reach the objective. The objective just being get to the base. While most levels can be cleanly split up into 3 acts, Norway is, for the most part, one big level. As once you reach the center of the base, you keep going in that level, where you have to defend a character against incoming enemies, you blow up a few things before escaping. Naturally, on skis, once you escape, the end section is really interesting as it's separated from the rest of the level. Because of story reasons, you must escape without your weapons, and, cherry on top, you're now freezing to death. Too much time away from a heat source will kill you, so not only do you have to juggle the enemies, ammo and health, but now your temperature. It's a small section and the mechanic never returns again, but that's what I really enjoy about this game, is that it really commits to a quality campaign that values the quality over the quantity. It reminds me a lot of classic games that will introduce a mechanic, use it to the fullest, and then drop it. I didn't feel as incentivized to replay this episode as much as the North African episode, as while there are different ways to get into the base, it doesn't change up gameplay as much, but this level is still a great time as I felt more motivated to stay stealthy. I should also mention that all the major episodes have collectibles to find. They're collectible letters that flesh out the story. I never went out my way to find them and barely found any, but they're a great way to encourage exploration to those who want it. Speaking of story, Part 2, the story of War. The last 2 episodes are more committed to story than spicing up gameplay. I've deliberately not mentioned story all that much, because for the most part it only serves to give context to who you're playing as and the setting you're playing in. For the last 2 episodes, the story is given more focus. Both deal with aspects of World War II that are rarely explored. They dedicate more time to setting up character arcs, especially the last one, which we'll get to it. A great detail that the game adds is that everyone speaks in their native language. I really love that they went with this decision, because something I hate in any media is when a group of characters, instead of speaking their native language, speak in English but with an accent. This happens a lot in video games. Assassin's Creed, for example, does it all the time. Am I saying that I would rather not understand a character, potentially distancing myself from relating to a character? Yes, because I am a very cultured man and I like subtitles. Anyway, these last 2 episodes, gameplay-wise, feel more like something you'd find in a Call of Duty or most other military shooter campaigns, with the gameplay being largely linear. The France episode focuses on the... Right, hold on, I want to be respectful and not mess up the pronunciation.
Tirailleur.
Okay, thank you Google, I will trust you. The
Tirailleur.
was an infantry unit made up of black soldiers fighting for the French army. It's an aspect of World War II that has been largely forgotten. The message behind the story is in fact just that. You play as Demi, who alongside his brother are finally able to fight alongside the French army instead of doing menial tasks. After launching a full-on assault against German forces and even managing to take over a local headquarters, cementing themselves as a crucial part of the Allied forces' victory against the Nazis, but suffer heavy losses after being ambushed by a Tiger tank. However, their story of victory is covered up and purposely forgotten due to intervention from their white commander. I knew nothing about the
Tirailleur.
before playing this, and obviously none of these episodes intend to show an accurate historical account, but I did enjoy learning that this did exist, and how sad that the history of it has been buried. I found the ending to be really effective emotionally, despite the fact that I'd only spent an hour with these characters, most of which is dedicated to gameplay without active storytelling. It makes me wonder how many stories have been lost to history, not because the record was never found, but because it was deliberately blighted. The last episode, however, tells a story that may deserve to be lost. The Last Tiger is interesting, and I definitely admire DICE for making something that could easily get them a lot of negative press. I guess they were already getting enough of that at the time, so I guess they just went for it. Taking place in Germany during the final days of World War II has you playing as a Nazi officer in charge of a Tiger tank. Tiger tanks have popped up throughout the entire campaign, even being a prominent part of the France episode, so being able to control the very thing that's been threatening you throughout the entire campaign is a really interesting choice. It's also definitely one of the very few times that Germans in World War II have been depicted as not 100% evil. And I do think I need to say, because Nazis, now that they're a common thing again, that neither I nor from my reading of this game suggest that Nazi soldiers in World War II deserve to be sympathised with. It clearly takes inspiration from the 2004 film Downfall, which depicts a very grounded depiction of Hitler in his final days. Throughout this episode, you get to know the crew within the tank very well, despite the short time you spend with them. You learn how close the relationship is between the officer you play as, Peter Müller, and the tank's driver, Kurtz, and how they deal with the younger members of the crew. Hartmann, who is implied to be suffering from a disability, and the other member of the crew, the brainwashed nationalist, Schroeder. Most of this episode involves you controlling the tank, with brief sections having you control Müller directly. The tank sections aren't that fun in my opinion. Since you're mainly fighting other tanks and your primary gun takes time to reload, most of the gameplay will have you staring at a tank while both of you reload, hoping that you can fire first. Obviously, it's an older tank, so it does feel stiff to control. Not that I understand that tanks are stiff to control, but nonetheless, even by the final moments, I was still having trouble getting a grasp on exactly how to control it. The final section involves the tank crew in their final stand as they know their side is lost. Mueller and Kurt show regret in what they've done throughout the war, but ultimately it's not Allied soldiers that take them down, it's their own brainwashed ally. If you are planning on playing this and don't feel comfortable playing as a group of humanized Nazis, then that's completely understandable. But personally, I find this a very interesting depiction, especially considering that most military shooters are just blatant British and American propaganda that suggests that they did absolutely nothing wrong during the war. So including this, I feel, was a nuanced choice. And that's the note the game ends on. A somber story about how an individual in a war can at first believe they are fighting for their country, for its values, but instead realize that they're fighting for a more powerful individual's evil ideology. Battlefield 5 actually took the time to create an interesting campaign filled with varied gameplay, interesting characters and stories, while most other games treat the campaign like an obligation. One of the most consistent parts of the Battlefield campaign is that it always emphasizes that the war was won by those actually fighting it on the ground, through soldiers cooperating, and at no point suggests that any high-ranking officer was the one who actually led their side to victory. To my knowledge, Winston Churchill is never even mentioned here. In fact, I don't think Hitler is mentioned. The only politician who gets directly mentioned is Neville Chamberlain, as you hear him announcing that Britain is at war with Germany. The only officers you see in this game is one that is taking advantage of the
Tirailleur.
soldiers and a Nazi. It's something you see very rarely in any war-related media. It's become so common to prop up officers and politicians, those who did not directly fight, and so often infantry and soldiers are thought of as just disposable. And I was genuinely surprised that it's admiring the ideas of winning as a collective rather than single individuals. So in the future, I'd like to talk more about how most campaigns and military shooters are glorifying the worst aspects of war, offering ideas that only lead to continuing the dangerous ramifications of nationalism. For now though, I just wanted to highlight this game and ask that people give it another shot, especially since at the time of making this, it's still available as part of PlayStation Plus. I don't think anyone expected the way I talked about the first episode about how it's like Hitman. Did not expect that they were going to get me talking about nationalism. Okay, what's my name? It's Fargo. Thank you all so much for watching. I will try and upload more stuff. Thank you. Please watch my videos again. I have 2 subscribers. Okay, thank you. Bye!